kiss my college crush at my best friend's wedding, his response completely stunned me. I am a strong believer in not crossing certain lines, and I believe in consequences as well. I mean, I am an adult, so of course I know that actions have consequences, but I also believe that the consequence of an action should be appropriate for the action. A judge can't sentence a person to 2 years in prison simply because of a noise ordinance violation or because he ran a red light, and that is what is happening with my marriage. Sure, I did something wrong, but the consequences that my husband is making me suffer are just excessive for the act. It was a simple, harmless kiss. Sure, there was some history behind it, but that doesn't mean anything. And to think of this happened during my best friend's wedding, a day that was supposed to be filled with joy and excitement turned into something else entirely. I think the problem started a few days before the wedding. I was with my best friend Sarah at a restaurant. We were going through the final details of the wedding when she dropped the bomb. She told me that Levi was going to be attending the wedding. When she said that to me, I was speechless and even immobile for a few seconds. My story with Levi was one that I didn't like to revisit. He was a guy I had a crush on for so long when we were in college, and I don't think I ever got over him. It was only years later that I found out that Levi had a crush on me as well, but stayed away because he didn't think I'd want to date him. I couldn't believe it. It was one of those love stories that was never fulfilled. So when I heard that he was going to be coming to the wedding, I felt my heart tingle. Sarah had to tap me to bring my attention back to her. She asked me if I was okay, and I nodded, but I knew that I wasn't. Before then, I never thought I would get the chance to meet Levi ever again, so I was never worried about our love story. But with this new update about him coming to the wedding, I felt an overflow of all the emotions I had buried down inside. I was excited to see him because it had been years since we finished college, and I hadn't seen him since then. I wanted to ask Sarah for his number, but I didn't know how to do that without sounding like I had an ulterior motive. But I didn't need to ask because Sarah said that Levi asked for my number and she gave it to him. But she still felt the need to give me his number, just in case he was taking his time to call or send me a message. He used to be the bashful type, back in college, and he was really good with girls, but he was kind and charming, and we were friends. Sarah gave me his number and asked me to give him a call if he didn't call me on time. At that point, I don't think Sarah realized how big of a bombshell she planted in my hand, because me having his number was the catalyst for everything that happened after that. When I got home, I was restless. My husband Jimmy asked me what was going on with me, and I told him that it was nothing, that I was just thinking about something for Sarah's wedding. But that was a big lie. I kept walking around the house in worry. I told myself that if I didn't get a call or a message from Levi by the next morning, then I would send him a message. So I waited. That felt like the longest night I had ever had in my entire life. I kept turning on the bed restless. My eyes were open half the time, and I couldn't stop my heart from beating so fast. I always put my phone on DND before I went to sleep because I didn't want any disturbing calls or texts. But that night, I didn't do that. I just kept waiting. And every time I received the notification, I would quickly pick up my phone and check if it was a message from Levi. But every single time I picked up my phone, I was disappointed. By the next morning, I had dark circles. My husband had to prepare and go to work, but he asked me to get some sleep because he knew I didn't get any throughout the night. He asked if I was expecting a package or payment because he noticed how I kept checking my phone throughout the night. I was a designer, so he was used to me checking my phone restlessly for updates, but he was just shocked I broke my no disturbance during sleep rule. He left for work, and I looked at my phone for a few more minutes before deciding to send Levi a text. I typed at least 20 different messages, but I wiped all the texts before I could send anyone. I didn't know what to say, and that was haunting me. I didn't know where to begin. I mean, how do you start such a message? I couldn't exactly confess my love to him after all. I was now a married woman. So what was the whole reason for me even sending a message? After much deliberation, I concluded that it would be better if I called him. So I opened my phone app and dialed his number. My heart was beating so hard that I was worried my chest was not going to be enough to occupy the beating of my heart. I was so close to ending the call and blocking his number so he wouldn't be able to call me. That was how scared and nervous I was. But before I could do that, he answered the call and said my name with so much recognition. It was clear that he had saved my number, but just didn't bother to call or text, so I angrily ended the call. Barely 3 seconds later, he called me back. I didn't want to answer the call, or I did, but I just wanted him to feel a little nervous as well. The phone rang for a few seconds before I picked it up, and when I did, the first question I asked him was why he finally decided to call me. You should have heard the way he chuckled lightly. I didn't need to see Levi to know that he was no longer the bashful guy we all knew in college. He was different, at least he sounded different. He called my name and asked me to calm down. He said that it would be better if we spoke in person and told me that he had just come into town the previous night. I couldn't believe it. He was already in town and he wanted to see me. My heart was going to explode. He asked me if I was free that day, and the normal me would have told him that I was busy, even though I wasn't. I would have done that to exert some form of dominance, like how I do with my business partners. But I couldn't refuse, so I told him that I had a free day. He asked me to meet him at a restaurant by 3 p.m, and after that, he ended the call. I couldn't believe the nerve of Levi. I don't know if he was doing it on purpose, but he had me so curious about him that I was ready to leave the house by 2 p.m. I got to the restaurant a few minutes before 3 o'clock, and Levi was there already. He really was punctual, and that was impressive, but that wasn't the only impressive thing about him. He was looking like a whole different person. He was better looking, taller, and bigger, but he still had his kind eyes and wonderful charisma. He smiled when he saw me and got up to welcome me. I acted like I was mad at him, so I didn't even bother to give him a handshake or a hug, or any of the pleasantries that old-time friends are supposed to exchange. He chuckled and asked me why I was angry. I pouted for a few seconds, but I finally let out what my problem was. I told him that he had gotten my number from Sarah earlier, and he didn't bother to call or even text. I accused him of not seeing me as important enough to reach out to me. He laughed and told me that I was being funny. I didn't see anything funny about what I had just said, and I told him that if he didn't stop laughing, I was going to get up and leave. He asked me to calm down, then he stopped laughing. He said that he didn't need to tell me this because he was sure I knew, because he made it so obvious with his nervousness around me. He then told me that he had the biggest crush on me when we were in college and that he had never stopped crushing on me, and he was always curious about what my life looked like now. He said that he was so happy when he miraculously got in touch with Sarah and she invited him for her wedding and told him that I would be there. He told me that his first thought was to call me and ask me to be his date to the wedding, but then he heard that I was married. So he didn't feel like it was right to come and put all that on me or even ask anything of me. I understood him. That was the whole reason I couldn't send him a text, because I didn't know what to say. What were two people who had a massive crush on each other going to do now that they couldn't be together? But we tried to make the best of the meeting. We caught up, talked, and laughed for hours, and I didn't even realize when night came. I was interrupted by a call from my husband, and that was when I checked the time. It was past 7 p.m. I told Levi that I had to be on my way, and we exchanged goodbyes. I told him that he could call or text me any time, and that he shouldn't overthink it. We hugged, and as we pulled away from each other, we looked into each other's eyes. I could see his eyes calling to me, but I tried my best to ignore them. I left and went home, but I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if our lives had turned out different. What would have happened if I didn't get married to Jimmy? Would Levi and I have stood a chance if I was still single? All these questions through my head like lightning through the clouds. I could feel a little spark for Levi in my heart, and I know that spark would explode if I exposed it to a little fuel. When I got home, my husband was curious about where I had gone. He knew I didn't have anywhere to go that day, so he was curious. I told him that I went to meet an old friend that just came into town. I didn't give any other details apart from that, and I yeffed it at that. From that night, Levi and I began talking very frequently over the phone. It felt like we both had this whole life that neither of us was aware of. So there was a lot for us to catch up on and talk about. Things were so fun, and I found myself going to bed late because I was so occupied chatting with Levi on the phone. On the eve of the wedding, we couldn't talk much because I was occupied with helping Sarah prepare for the wedding. She was my best friend, so I was heavily invested in the wedding. Plus, I was also her maid of honor. When the morning of the wedding came, I was just as happy for her as she was for me during my own wedding, which was just a year ago. She took her vows in a church. Her family was very religious, so they wouldn't accept any destination wedding or anything of that sort. I saw Levi seated in the audience and I smiled at him. My husband was also present. He was also friends with Sarah, so he couldn't miss the wedding. I was by Sarah's side on the altar as the wedding progressed, but my eyes were on Levi. He had this brave smile on his face that was very captivating. He would bite his lips and smile at me like I was a possession of his. I won't lie, it made me excited to get some sort of attention from somebody that wasn't my husband, especially somebody that I had a huge crush on. After the wedding, I followed Sarah to the reception, and we began talking while we were in the car. She told me that she noticed how Levi was looking at me. We both laughed and joked about it. One of the things she said that stuck with me, though, was when she said, "Too bad nothing can happen between the two of you." It made me think. It really was sad. The love that never was, that never could be, that never would be. I didn't like how that sounded, and I felt like I wanted something to happen between us. No matter how little the moment, I just wanted something for us to remember each other by. When we got to the reception, I looked for Levi. Thankfully, my husband didn't expect much attention from me that day because he knew I would be very busy as the maid of honor. I watched as Sarah danced with her new husband, and when the dance floor was open to everyone, Levi approached me and asked me to dance with him. I didn't think that was a problem after all. You could ask anyone for a dance. So I accepted. We slow danced to the music that was being played and looked into each other's eyes. As we were dancing, Levi asked me a question that took me by surprise. He asked me if I thought we would have ended up together if he was just bold enough to confess his feelings for me. I didn't know what the answer to that question was, and honestly, I don't even think I understood the question. I asked him what he meant, and he clarified by saying that he was curious if I thought we would have gotten married if he confessed his feelings for me. I told you I couldn't predict how our lives would have been if we took different actions, but I also told him that I crushed on him so much that even Sarah would tease me because of it. He laughed and told me that I was lying because I didn't want him to feel bad. I laughed and told him that I wasn't lying and shared some stories from my past about how I was always so flustered when I talked to him. He thought I was being cold, but I was always so nervous while talking to him that I just tried to wrap up our conversations and get away as soon as possible. I was so lost in our conversation that I didn't hear when the master of ceremony asked everyone to clear the dance floor. It was only after other dancers had began going back to their seats that we realized we were to leave as well. But instead of going back to our seats, I asked Levi to follow me. I pulled Levi, leading him out of the reception hall. I took him to a corridor where we faced each other, and I asked him what would happen to us after the wedding. He told me that he would go back to where he lived and resumed work. He specifically told me that he would have loved to stay in town and see where things between us could go, but he couldn't do that because I was married. He didn't want to be a homewrecker. I told him to tell me what he would have done if I wasn't married. I knew I shouldn't have been asking such questions, but my heart was beating to a different tone, a tone it hadn't beaten to ever before, and something in me wanted to explore that tone. I wanted to get a snippet of what life with him would have been. The more we spoke in that corridor, the more I felt my heart beating faster and faster. I felt like I needed to do something to make my heart slow down, and the only thing that seemed like it would be able to satisfy my heart was Levi's lips. So I reached for his lips and kissed him so passionately. I kissed him with everything in me for over 10 seconds, and after that, I wanted more, so I pulled Levi into the women's restroom. I checked all the toilet cubicles to make sure there was no one in there, and when I could confirm that there was no one there, I walked to Levi, who was a bit confused. Standing in the middle of the women's restroom, I wasn't scared if somebody was going to walk in. I asked him to kiss me. He looked like he was scared to do it, so I asked him if he didn't like the kiss we just shared in the corridor. He told me that he loved it very much, but he reminded me that I was married and he didn't want to take advantage of me. I smiled at him and told him to kiss me like my husband never existed. He was acting hesitant, so I told him to forget it and I was about to walk away. But before I could walk away, he pulled me into his embrace and gave me a wonderful kiss. We kissed for so long that our lips soon turned red. He was smeared with my lipstick and he soon grabbed my behind. It was a very passionate moment in which I let my emotions get the better of me. He kissed my neck and let out a soft moan while I grabbed his hair. We were having a very intense moment. We was back to kissing my lips and his hands were already raising my gown. But before we could get that far, the restroom door slammed open and my husband barged in. Levi and I quickly pulled away from each other. My husband couldn't believe his eyes. He was so shocked by what he had just witnessed. I was so embarrassed and anxious. I didn't know what my husband was going to do. He was silent for a while. Then he asked me what was going on. It was as though he wanted me to confess with my own mouth. But I was speechless. Levi looked at me and said, "I think I should be on my way." He tried to walk past my husband, but before he could get past him, Jimmy grabbed the collar of Levi's shirt and looked at my lipstick smear on his neck and lip and cheeks. He punched Levi, but he still didn't let him go. He punched Levi a few more times until Levi caught his hand. The fight got out of hand and they took it out of the bathroom. People soon began gathering outside to see what was going on. I was crying and screaming, hoping that they would stop fighting, but that didn't seem to be the case. Sarah came out with her husband and they saw what was happening. She took one look at me and knew what was happening. She angrily walked away while her husband followed her. I had ruined my best friend's wedding simply because I had no control over my emotions and urges. After a while, some of the men there were able to separate them, but the damage was already done. Levi walked away with his shirt torn and his face bruised. He looked upset and frustrated as he stormed off the wedding grounds. My husband looked at me. He was furious and clearly still angry. I was honestly scared he was going to come at me and perhaps slap me, but he just walked away. I was so confused I didn't know if I should go after him or go apologize to Sarah. I stood there for a while, looking like a confused fool, but I later got my head in order and ran after him. He had driven off in his car, so I quickly went back in to get my bag. Then I got a cab and hurried home. I thought he'd be home, but when I got home, he wasn't there. I tried calling his phone, but it was switched off. I was so frustrated that I just sat outside waiting for him. I had the key, and I could have opened the door at any time, but I needed him to come home and meet me there. After staying there for almost 40 minutes, he finally came home. He came out of the car and stood up. I tried to explain things to him, but he didn't want to hear anything that I had to say. He walked past me and unlocked the door, then headed into the bedroom. I quickly followed him and told him that we just kissed and nothing more. I told him I was sorry and that he was making the whole thing bigger than it actually is. That was when he paused and looked at me. He told me that I had to be the most stupid person to be alive at that point. I was shocked by him suddenly calling me stupid, and I told him that he was taking things too far. I asked him to calm down so we could talk things out properly, but it seemed he wasn't interested in having any form of conversation with me. He walked to the living room where he picked up a few things, then went back to the bedroom. He packed a small bag, and I asked him where he was going. He told me that he didn't want to be anywhere near cheaters. I told him that I didn't cheat on him, that he couldn't argue with mere facts. I reminded him that he walked in on us kissing, and that I was very sorry for that. But I clearly stated that we didn't do anything more than that. He was flustered by how irrational I was being with my answers. He shook his head and told me that I was unbelievable. When he was done packing the bag, I rushed to the front door and stood in his way, telling him that if he wanted to leave the house, then he would have to forgive me for kissing Levi. He told me he could never forgive me because I was a cheap woman who would give herself away for the thrill of the moment. I was so hurt by those words that I called him a cruel man. He laughed and told me to get out of his way. I refused. That was when he pulled out his phone and made a call. I was curious about who he was calling. He put the phone on speaker. I heard my mother's voice asking Jimmy how the wedding was going. Jimmy told her that he had to leave the wedding early. I shook my head, begging him silently to not tell my mother anything. I slowly moved out of the way while he stepped out of the house. My mom then asked about me, and he told her that he lost me at the wedding. I couldn't even follow him to continue pleading because I was so scared of him telling my mother what I had done. He got into his car and drove off. I was panicking. How could he do this to me? I felt hurt. He used my mother to threaten me and refused all my pleas. I became angry. Since I wasn't able to get through to him, I decided to try to talk to Sarah. I picked up my phone and called her, but she wasn't picking my calls. I was so worried about that. I got a taxi and went back to the reception hall. The reception had ended, and Sarah and her husband were no longer there. They had left. I went to the hotel they were supposed to stay in together that night, but they wouldn't answer the door when I knocked. After I knocked for almost 2 minutes, I heard Sarah's voice from inside as she shouted, telling me to get away from her. She was clearly crying because her voice was cracked. I felt horrible and I didn't know what to do. After some time, the door opened and her husband came out. He pleaded with me to let her be for the meantime because I had really upset Sarah. I spoiled her big day. Her husband wasn't happy with me as well, but he figured that if he didn't come to talk to me, I'd keep knocking on the door and he didn't want that. I felt so lost and alone. My best friend didn't want to talk to me and my husband had completely alienated me. I went back home and I cried my eyes out. I slept alone that night because my husband didn't come home. The next morning, I tried calling him, but he didn't pick any of my calls. Neither did Sarah. That was when I certainly remembered that my husband was on the call with my mother when he left. I quickly called my mother and asked her if my husband said anything to her. She seemed confused and asked if my husband was supposed to tell her something. With her response, I knew my husband didn't tell her about me and Levi, and I was thankful for that. No one was talking to me for almost an entire week, and it was getting very lonely for me. I understood Sarah's anger after all. I crashed her wedding. But I don't think I properly understood my husband's anger. Yes, I kissed another man. Yes, it was wrong of me to do so. But this was something we would talk about calmly, and you would simply forgive me. But he clearly wasn't doing that. I was working at home one evening. A client had requested a design, and I was on it when I heard the doorbell ring. I thought it was Jimmy, so I hurried to the door. I was disappointed when I got there because it wasn't Jimmy. It was a stranger delivering a document. When I got it, I went into the house and opened it. What I saw inside left me completely blown away. It was the divorce papers from Jimmy. This was just too much. It's not like I committed adultery. It was a simple kiss. Sure, more would have happened if my husband didn't come in at the time he did. But the point is, more didn't happen. It was a simple case, and my husband was taking things too far. I feel so hurt that he could do this to me. He was literally throwing everything we had away just because of a brief moment I had with Levi. Update. Hello, everyone. Let the record show that I'm a single woman again. And I am in the market for people who are more serious. My husband successfully divorced me. Well, it's his loss. I don't know what he was expecting, for me to go on my knees begging like a street urchin because of some petty kiss. Let's all be honest. If I wanted to take things too far with Levi, I would have taken him to a more private place. But I didn't do that. Anyways, I have never felt so hurt and betrayed like I do right now, because my best friend decided that she could not forgive me for ruining her wedding. And it's just stupid, because she was the one who set things in motion between Levi and me. If she didn't invite him to the wedding, or even give me his number, or even see those things she said in the car on the way to the reception, none of this would have happened. But now she wants to put all the blame on me. Besides, I don't even know what she's so mad about. She got married, and that's the most important thing. Then there's my husband. His betrayal is the most annoying one. I think he was just using this as an excuse to break things off with me. I think he's been planning it for quite some time now, because why else would he get so worked up about something so trivial? Anyways, after the divorce, we had to sell the house to split the proceeds, which was only fair given that we bought the house together. My mom learned about her divorce and she nearly lost her mind. And here's the most annoying part of it all. Since after the wedding, I haven't been able to reach Levi. It's as though he blocked me. It's just funny to think that my marriage crumbled because of him, and now he wasn't even bothered about reaching out to me. I guess I was just surrounded by fake friends and snakes.